Welcome to another VHA Emerging Health Technology Advancement Center virtual demonstration. Today we will be reviewing the HIMSS 2013 Interoperability Showcase demonstration for data segmentation for privacy using healthcare privacy and security labels. We'll focus our demonstration on three DS4P use cases. One where the patient wishes to share only portions of their clinical record. Two, where the patient has no privacy concerns or effectively sharing all. And three, emergency treatment. In each use case, we'll review its authorization events, the patient's consent directive, clinical rules and organizational policy, document transformation, enforcement of obligations and refrain policies, and the metadata exchange between organizations. Before we look at our DS4P use cases, let's do a high-level review of the components that are interacting during this exchange of data between SAMHSA and VA. Prior to cross-enterprise document query, the veteran patient is selected in the DS4P mobile portal. The ad hoc query request is intercepted at SAMHSA and handed off to their SAML validator, who then makes a callback to the VA SAML handler for the requester's credentials and attributes. It should be noted that the trust model is based on an out-of-band exchange of certificates between participating organizations and not the individual requester. The VA then asserts the requester's identity, its purpose of use, organization information, resource permissions, clearance, and sensitivity privileges. The SAML validator validates the assertion, and these attributes are the basis of the XACML request. The SAML validator hands off the request to the XACML context handler, and then the patient's consent directive is retrieved from the SAMHSA XDSB repository. The computable XACML policy is extracted from the CDA document. The context handler then forms the XACML request, and both the XACML request and the patient's computable XACML consent policy are sent to the PDP. The authorization decision then occurs, and assuming permit, the adapter is then allowed to return a listing of documents for the requested patient. Our example of eHealthExchange.query is consistent with the Connect authorization framework. At this time, we could request the doc using XD protocols, knowing the document and repository IDs that were returned in the metadata. We differ in our approach here. In the VA SAMHSA pilot, we've chosen to annotate, segment the document in real time, and if and only if the user requests that document. At that time, we evaluate clinical facts and rules, the patient's privacy concerns, org and jurisdictional policies, acting on each accordingly prior to delivering the document. All of these at any time could change. As with document query, the document retrieve request is intercepted and handed off to the SAML validator. Again, both the requester's attributes and the patient consent directive are retrieved and sent through the XACML context handler. This time, however, we are less concerned about the previously authorized requester, but instead we are focused on the obligations required by the patient, such as the redaction of substance abuse information. These obligations and the requester's purpose of use are returned to the adapter and delivered to the document orchestrator. The document orchestrator will then request the most recent authoritative clinical summary for the patient from SAMHSA's XDSB repository. The document orchestrator will then make a call to the security labeling service, passing in the requester's purpose of use and organization identity. The security labeling service will then generate applicable document annotation rules based on known clinical facts and organization and jurisdictional constraints. The rules and the now decomposed clinical summary are sent to the rules engine for processing. A series of document annotation actions are returned, directing the document transformation engine to apply tagging actions to specific observations within the document. The original clinical summary is then transformed, first redacting, then applying annotation and masking specific observations, both in the structured and narrative sections of the document. If directed, encryption is also applied to the entire document. The document is finally packaged for delivery to the requesting user. Now that we've made it through the high-level overview, let's move on to some of the data segmentation for privacy use cases. In the share partial use case, our test patient with known substance abuse, mental health, and acute HIV has authorized disclosure of their clinical summary to Dr. Duane at the VA. For demonstration purposes, we have interrupted the data flow so we may view some of the actions that have occurred to the document and its contents. Per the SAMHSA obligation policy, the document payload is encrypted. We'll decrypt it and view its contents. The 42 CFR Part 2 warning is displayed due to the non-redisclosure without consent refrain policy that was delivered in the metadata. When viewing the clinical summary, we note that there are several masked entries. Assuming we have the necessary sensitivity permissions and are the intended recipient, we will request unmasking of these observations from the policy enforcement point. Acute HIV and the AZT equivalent medication are revealed to Dr. Duane. Note that the document and sections have been tagged with the confidentiality of restricted. We'll close out the clinical summary now and take a look at some of the things going on in the background. First, the document retrieves SAML assertion, where the VA asserts Dr. Duane's identity, his credentials, his structured role, and his purpose of use, in this case, treatment. The VA SAMHSA pilot shares a common access control logging service, where each authorization event, obligations, rule generation, and rule execution is logged for each document request. The obligations for our share partial use case show that the patient wishes to redact substance abuse and mental health related information and mask for the recipient's eyes only HIV. Many rules are generated by the security labeling service. These rules are acted on and logged. In this use case, the redaction of substance abuse and an antidepressant, as well as the masking of acute HIV and the AZT equivalent medication are noted. Using the same patient, let's move on to the emergency treatment use case. First, we'll change the user's purpose of use to emergency treatment. Typically, this is something that would occur during a workflow event such as login. For demonstration purposes, we'll do it this way. We'll perform another document query and document retrieve. We'll decrypt the document, view it, and again the 42 CFR Part 2 warning is displayed. Notice that both the substance abuse and the antidepressant medication were delivered, and that no observation required unmasking. Also, that in the SAML assertion, the VA has asserted a purpose of use of emergency treatment in the request for the document. In the metadata returned from the document request, SAMHSA has noted its intended use is for emergency purposes only. Again, let's review the access control logs and look at the obligations, the rules generated, and those acted on. The obligations returned from the authorization event are the same. The patient still wishes to redact substance abuse and mental health related issues and mask HIV. The rules generated differ, specifically ignoring the patient consent directive based on the purpose of use of emergency treatment. And the rules executed against the document during document transformation require only that sensitive observations are tagged and that confidentiality and document handling policies are applied. Let's move on to our final use case, share all. Our test patient, in this case, has authorized the release of their clinical summary to Dr. Duane at the VA. The patient has been diagnosed with a psychotic disorder, alcohol abuse, type 2 diabetes, and sickle cell anemia. The patient is actively receiving an antipsychotic, metformin, and hydroxyurea as part of their ongoing treatment. They have no privacy concerns, and their consent directive reflects this. Dr. Duane at the VA performs a cross-enterprise doc query and doc retrieve. We will be required to decrypt the document per the SAMHSA document handling obligation of encryption. When viewing the clinical summary, the 42 CFR Part 2 warning is displayed per the non-redisclosure without consent refrain policy in the metadata. The document and its applicable sections are tagged with the confidentiality of restricted, and all observations related to substance abuse, mental health, and sickle cell anemia are annotated and visible to Dr. Duane. We haven't spent a lot of time on the metadata delivered to the VA from SAMHSA, so let's take a closer look now. The overarching confidentiality for the document is R for restricted. The release is intended for use of treatment purposes. The document handling obligation for encryption, the no redisclosure refrain policy, and the intended recipient, Dr. Duane. Let's take a final look at the obligations from the patient, the rules that were generated, and the actions taken during document transformation. There were no obligations returned when evaluating the patient consent directive, only organizational policy constraints. The Security Labeling Service has noted no patient constraints during rules generation. And no redaction or masking occurred during document transformation, only the tagging of sensitive observations. This concludes this demonstration of data segmentation using privacy and security labels. I'd like to personally thank those individuals who participated on the VA SAMHSA pilot team.